That's why, of course, perception is influencing decision-making process. Also, when you talk about decision-making, there are different models. We are going to discuss some of those models, find out when to use each one, what are the advantages, disadvantages of each model. Moreover, we are going to discuss different errors that might influence decision-making process. Of course, negatively, it is going to influence decision-making process, in addition to other issues. So mainly, we are going to discuss issues related here to perception and decision-making in this chapter. Okay. Now, first, let us talk about perception. Okay. Let us start here with the main question, which is, what is perception? What is perception?
It's how individuals organize and interpret the information around them and organize them in order to give a meaning for their environment.
Okay, so when we talk about perception, we are talking about a mechanism where we interpret different situations or things. Now, when we talk about perception, simply talking, it is how we understand things surrounding us. Okay, so in order to understand those situations or things, here we are talking about how we are going to interpret those situations or things, and according to that we are going to issue judgments. Okay, and maybe that's why in this textbook at least there is some sort of linkage here between perception and decision making. Maybe in other textbooks we are going to find it in separate chapters. Okay, but here maybe another concept is here, because of course not only perception is going to influence our decisions, also when we talk about values, attitudes, everything is going to influence us when we take decisions. But here, according to how we explain or interpret things or we deal with, we are going to react in a certain way. That's why it is mentioned here that how we use our interpretation to give meaning to our surroundings or environment around us. Okay. Now, when you talk about perception also, here there are two dimensions that we need to discuss. Okay, our own perception and the real situation, how it is. Okay. Now, when you talk about reality, this means that there are two aspects of reality here. There is the aspect that we understand according to how we interpret things around us, and there is the real aspect of the situation. Which is going to influence us more? Yes?
Not the real aspect, because we are going to judge the persons according to our perception, attitudes, values toward this person. How could we understand this, and then we will judge.
Okay, and that's why we said that the word that is perceived is the word that is behaviorally important, because the reality itself, if we do not perceive it or if we do not understand it, or let me say, if we do not see it, then it is not going to influence the way how we are going to interpret different situations. So what is important here is how we understand things. Okay, so the most important here reality which is going to influence our behaviors in general is what we perceive. That's why we say that perception is very important and it is going to influence our behaviors in general. Okay, and this is an important point. The reality itself as it is not so important as how we perceive reality, because how we perceive reality is going to influence how we are going to behave or react or deal with different situations. Okay. Now another issue here which is important is factors influence perception. Okay. Now when you talk about perception, there are three main factors here. The first one is related to us or the individual. Okay. The second one is related to the situation itself. And the third one is related to the object or the thing that we are interpreting. Okay. So we, others, in addition to surroundings or environment or the situation itself. Now when we talk about each factor, there are different sub-factors here or elements which is going to influence how we perceive things or how we are going to interpret things. Now when you talk about the individuals, okay, of course here we are going to talk about a lot of individual dynamics like values, attitudes, motives, etc. Here we are talking about all those issues that we have discussed earlier, in addition to issues that we are going to discuss later, okay, like experiences, expectations, and so on, okay. Now all those are factors or elements which is going to influence how we are going to interpret things or perceive things. Now, at the same time, there are other things here which is related, or other factors which is related to the situation itself. Okay. Now, when you talk about the situation here, more we are talking about the circumstances that we are facing. Okay. As an example, like time, when work settings, social settings, issues related to maybe the situation itself in terms of its components, for example, if there are other external influences, for example, and so on. Now the third factor here or package is the target itself, or the thing that we are trying to interpret or explain. And here we are talking about different issues related to the characteristics of the target itself. Like, for example, novelty, motion, sound, size, etc. All those. Here, again, we are talking about the characteristics of the thing that we are trying, or the target that we are trying to understand. Okay? That's the word understand is important when you talk about perception, because perception, in other words, is how we understand things around us, according, of course, to the interpretation or explanation or whatever you like to call it here. Okay, so in general, those are the main concepts which is related to perception. Again, perception is how we interpret things around us, and according to that we are going to issue some judgments here related to the environment and how to deal with the environment. When you talk about perception, there is what we perceive and the reality of the thing. What is more important here is how we perceive things, because we are going to behave according to what we perceive, not according to how things are really are. When you talk about perception, again, there are factors which influence perception. We can categorize those factors into three different categories. The first one is the perceiver, factors related to the perceiver, factors related to the situation, in addition to factors related to the target. And under each category there are factors or sub-factors which is related to each category. Okay. Now, one of the theories that might help us in think about perception and how perception occur is the attribution theory. Okay. Now, when you talk about the attribution theory, according to this theory, we try to explain what are the causes of perception. We are trying to understand what are the causes of perception. And according, again, to this theory, the causes are attributed either to external factors or internal factors. So here we say that there are two causes of behavior. There are external causes and there are internal causes. Okay. Now, the attribution theory suggests a process here, okay, which is known as the attribution process. According to this process, we observe things, okay, and then we try to interpret those things to understand what is happening, okay, and according to that we can attribute causes, okay. So here, according to the reaction, to the final reaction, we can decide whether the causes are external or internal, okay? And of course, we are going to take some examples in order to understand more how this process works, okay? Now, first, we observe the behavior, okay? This is the mechanism process here, okay? We need to see behavior, And according to this behavior, we can judge the behavior whether it is attributed to external influences or internal influences, or external or internal causes here. Okay. Now, according to the attribution theory, there are three different situations. According to those situations, we can decide whether the causes are internal or external. Now, the first one is distinctiveness, the second one is consensus, and the third one is consistency. Okay. Now, first, let us discuss what is distinctiveness and what is consensus. Talking about whether individuals at different situations they behave differently. Okay. Now, there are slight differences here between the explanation of those terminologies. Let us first, point by point, understand what is the meaning of. Okay. So when you talk about distinctiveness here, we are talking about different behaviors in different situations. Okay. When you talk about consensus, here we are talking up to what extent this behavior is similar to the group behavior. Individuals, usually they are working, for example, with others. Okay. Here we need to find whether this behavior is consensus to others' behaviors, okay, or it is different. Okay. Now, the third one is consistency. Here we are talking up to what extent individuals are behaving the same way in similar situations. Are behaving the same way in similar situations. Okay. So, now, if distinctiveness is high, here we say that the causes are external. Okay. Now, of course, if it is low, here we are going to say that it is internal. Now, consensus, it is the same. If the consensus is high, here we are talking about external influences or causes. And of course, if it is low, we are talking about internal causes. Now, consistency is different. If it is high, we are saying here that the causes are internal. And of course, if not, here we are talking about external causes. Who can explain why? Let us take the first one, for example. Distinctiveness, we said up to what extent, okay, individuals are behaving differently in different situations. Now, if it is high, which means that individuals are behaving differently in different situations, we say here that the causes are external. Why? Yes?
Now I will give you the first example and then I can explain. Suppose that we that Mr. X...
think here about the two opinions. Okay. Now, you said first, if someone is late for the work 10 minutes or, for example, okay, here we are talking about high distinctiveness or low distinctiveness. But we cannot judge this unless we compare it with other situations. Okay. Now, for example, if this individual is late to show for the work and late to attend meetings, for example, and late when dealing with appointments, for example, and so on. So here we say that there is low distinctiveness. And this means that those behaviors are influenced by the individual. That's why we say that it is here internal influences. Okay. Now, if this individual is only late for showing for work, okay, but when you talk about meetings, there is some sort of commitment. When you talk about appointments, there is also some sort of commitment and so on. So the behavior here is highly distinctive. Okay, it is different. It is not the same in different situations. So there are external influences forcing this individual to behave in a certain way sometimes, or in a different way sometimes. Okay, now we can explain this in another, using another, let me say here, angle to think about the situation. Not always external influences are related to other individuals. Okay, sometimes external influences are related to the environment itself. Now let me go back to the first example you have proposed. Okay, maybe this individual who was late, maybe there was a problem in transportation, for example. Okay, so he was late. Okay, so it was not influenced by the individual. But if he is late for everything, appointments, meetings, showing for work, and so on. Here we say that there is low distinctiveness, and this is an internal causes which is caused by the individual, him or herself. Okay, but if it is in a certain circumstances, in a way, and in other circumstances, different ways, then here nuances, or whether it is related also to environmental, but caused by other individuals or management or colleagues, whatever. Okay. So here, if we are talking first again about distinctiveness, if we are talking about high distinctiveness, we are talking about external causes. If we are talking about low distinctiveness, here we are talking about internal causes. Okay. We are clear on this point. Now, let us talk about consensus. When you talk about consensus, it is the same, let me say here, rule. Okay. If we are talking about high consensus, we are talking here about external causes. If we are talking about low consensus, here we are talking about internal causes. Now, why, when we talk about high consensus, we are talking about external causes? Yes?
Because if all members of the group agree about specific behavior, so that means that push them to
beginning that consensus with others' behavior. Okay, so if it is highly consistent with others' behavior, here we are talking about external causes. If it is the opposite, then we are talking about internal causes. Mainly internal
causes is related to the individual. When you talk about external causes, either it is related to the environment or others working with the individual and so on. Now, when you talk about consistency, it is the opposite. Okay? How? Because consistency, it is up to what extent individuals are behaving the same way in similar situations and so on. So here we are talking about, if it was low, then we are talking about external forces. If it is highly consistent, we are talking about external if it is highly consistent, we are talking about internal forces. If it is low consistent, here we are talking about external forces. Because if the individual is behaving the same way in similar situations, then it is something which is initiated by the individual. Because the environment is not the same here. We are talking about different environmental situations. Okay, so every time this individual is behaving the same, so that's why we are saying here that it is internally influenced by the individual. If this individual in similar situations behave differently, then we are attributing the causes here for external causes, because according to the environmental factors here, the individual is behaving in different ways, though the situation is the same. Okay, now why we need to understand whether the causes of the behavior is internal or external. What is the importance of the attribution theory? Yes?
Because it helps judging people, other people. I mean, when I look at the person and I say that these are internal causes, my perception is going to be like he is or she is 100% responsible for his or her actions. But when I say there are external causes, it's like I'm giving some kind of justification. I am giving this person another chance. So it helps how I judge and how I let people interact around.
Okay, and this is important when we need to, of course, we said at the beginning of this semester why we need to study behavior, because if we understand behavior, we can change, we can control, we can modify behavior, and so on. So if we can attribute the causes either to internal or external causes, then this is going to enhance our ability to deal with individuals' behavior within the organization. So if it is internal causes, then here we need to deal with the individual in order to deal with the behavior. Okay. If we are talking about external causes, then there is something which is related to the environment that we need to do something about it. Okay, in order to modify or change or enhance the behavior, whatever we need here to do with the behavior of the individual. So it is important to understand the causes, because this is part of understanding the behavior itself, and this is going to enhance our ability to deal with the behavior. And the key element when you talk about organization behavior, we need to understand behavior in order to deal with the behavior of people inside the organization. Now, still we are talking about perception and the basic concepts related to perception. One of the issues that is important here is errors and biases in attributions. Okay, sometimes the way how we think about things, there are some mistakes we do. Okay, and here we are going to discuss two different types of errors. Okay, the first one, we call it fundamental attribution error. Now, according to the fundamental attribution error here, usually individuals blame, focus on internal factors more than external factors, or they neglect or underestimate or undermine the environmental factors. Okay, and this is a mistake. Okay, why? Why we consider underestimating, okay, or undermining the external factors is something, we call it an error. Why? Yes?
Because you just can't say like anyone he's acting because he wants so. Maybe there's some external factors that affect him and affect his behavior. So you must understand so you can judge correctly on the person.
Okay, so that is true. What else? Yes?
Because sometimes external factors play such a vital role in the behaviors of others.
And in so many cases, we are forced to do sometimes things that we do not want or we do not like, and so on. But we find it either it is necessary, or sometimes we are forced to do something that we do not like, and so on. Okay, so we cannot neglect here the external factors. Okay, and of course, as a result, for fundamental attribution error, usually here the blame for people, usually it is higher, okay, by the individual, him or herself. And that's why the tendency to blame people here is higher. And this is a problem, because sometimes, as we have discussed just right now, it is out of the hand of individuals, and sometimes we have to do things right. This is
not the issue that we discuss here. We are talking about reality, how things happen. People sometimes do things that they do not want to do, or they do not believe that they have to do. This happen. That's why we say here it is not fair to
keep blaming others.
exactly blaming people for everything, because sometimes there are external influences here which is influencing the behavior of individuals. Now, another bias here or error, we call it self-serving bias. Okay, now when you talk about the self-serving bias, here we are talking about how let me go back to fundamental attribution errors. When we think about fundamental attribution errors here, it is maybe sometimes, or in most cases, let us have an example here, like managers, sometimes they might blame their subordinates for not performing some tasks, okay, some data, for example, and it was not provided, or there was some equipment needed or guidance, whatever. Okay, so they neglect here the external factors. Okay, when you talk about self-serving bias, we are talking here about bias. Here we are talking about a behavior which is initiated by the individual, not others. Errors and biases in attribution, the causes of behavior, or here we are talking about more attribution, the results of the behavior itself. So if there is a success again, then it is my own doing. If there is a failure, here we are talking about others causing this failure, and this what we call self-serving bias. Now those errors, why we consider it again errors, biases, etc. Again, in other words, what is the negative consequences of those errors and biases? What are the negative consequences of the fundamental attribution error and the self-serving bias? Yes?
When it comes to the fundamental
are saying that we are blaming others. But me as a manager or as an employee in the organization, I can't just keep blaming others, because this will cause further failure for me or for other people. And of course, this will affect negatively on their work or on the other employees' work. But when it comes to the self-serving bias, if I keep just taking credit for everything good that happens, it may cause some ego, that my ego will rise or something like this, and hence my performance is going to be lower.
What else? Yes?
We did wrong judgments, and when we do that, that means we didn't go through the right way to evaluate and to make correctness, but we make the situation much worse.
Okay. Now, at the beginning of this lecture, we said when you talk about perception, here how reality is perceived by individual is important or most important here, but real reality is not equally important, okay, or it is less important. Why? Because people, when they act or behave in a certain way, they behave according to how they interpret reality or how they understand reality. Okay. Now here we are talking about misunderstanding to reality. Okay. So here we are talking about like if the behavior is based on some sort of explanation for the situation, but this explanation or interpretation is not real. But for the individuals, this is the reality. This is one of the most important defects or deficiencies when you talk about how people deal with their perception. Okay, it is like, let me describe it in another way. I cannot say only some people. A lot of people, when they
think about things, they do not look for the full picture or the whole picture. They look for they see part of the picture or the photo, okay? So there is no comprehensive perception about all elements related to the situation. And this, of course, is going to cause some mistakes or errors, and of course it is going to influence the results. Instead of having positive results, we might have, of course, here some sort of negative results, okay? So this is the negative consequences of those in general. I'm not talking about specific details here, okay, which you have explained already. I'm talking about in general how this is going to affect our perception. It is going to guide our perception in a different way. Instead of understanding the reality as how it is, we are going to have our own reality, and of course we are going to react according to our own reality rather than the reality itself. Okay. Okay, this is enough for today.